This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have writer, editor, and guy who does whatever it takes, Beau L'Amour, here to talk about his new release, Skyring Water. Welcome, Beau.
Thank you so much. That's the best intro.
Well, thank you so much for getting this book out into the world. It was absolutely thrilling from start to finish in all the very best ways. But before I gush about it, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
I always feel, when you're writing a book, you're so into like every single detail of it. And what I like to do when asked this question is I'm going to read the flap copy because I wrote it. And I feel like it does a really good job of like getting you there without like, spoilering anything or anything like that. Okay, so here we go. Louis and Beau L'Amour present A Collaboration Across Time, an epic novel of Cold War suspense, a pair of unlikely heroes, a woman without a name, and the undefeated agents of the Third Reich find themselves locked in a deadly race to control the greatest secret of the 20th century. It is 1961. The world is on the brink of nuclear war. Empires are crumbling. Walls are dividing nations. And in Barcelona, chaos is unleashed when a rogue officer of the East German Stasi attempts to blackmail a pair of struggling arms dealers. The secret, 30 tons of gold hidden in an icebound wilderness at the end of the world. Mike Fowler is a former Navy salvage diver and OSS assassin. Anton Voss is an expatriate German scientist whose past grows darker the closer anyone looks. Once they might have been enemies, yet the two share an inseparable bond. They have saved each other's lives. But all of that is put at risk when Mike discovers Anton standing over a midnight visitor with a gun in his hand. Now they're on the run and allied with gangsters, pursued by the CIA, Israeli intelligence, and a shadowy cabal bent on creating an invisible empire. The trail leads from the rain-soaked docks of Marseille to the futuristic towers of Caracas and the ruins of a secret island laboratory in Argentine Patagonia. The only way for Mike to save his oldest friends and the woman he loves is to unlock a decades-old mystery buried in his partner's Nazi past before it destroys them all.
And it is every bit as explosive and thrilling as that sounds. If I can just say without spoiling, it is a very James Bond intro, Beau. I mean, I almost heard the da-na music going on. So
we all kind of rest on the shoulders of giants. When I set out to write it, one of the things that my dad and I had discussed when he and I were talking about it many years ago, he had just written Last of the Breed, which was a Cold War thriller. And we thought that this story might evolve into something similar. And since then, I thought, well, you don't see too many of these any longer. I'm walking the path of Jean Le Carré and Ken Follett and Alistair MacLean and all these people, and of course Ian Fleming being kind of the godfather of the whole genre. And yeah, of course I had to go there.
Yeah, it was so breathtaking and so cool. And I remember finishing that opening scene, and I was just like, okay, I can't stop. I've got to keep going. And every chapter was like that. I was so hooked on this story, and it has all those elements in terms of the high stakes. It really doesn't get any higher as the story unfolds. And all the characters you introduce, they're so awesome. And I really have to ask you mentioned your dad. This particular manuscript, was it well developed? Did you have to do a lot with it? Was it just an idea?
It was a complete manuscript that was, if you broke the book into 5 acts, it would pretty much be act 4. It was an entire story, but it ended up being a piece of the near ending. And the original idea showed up in my dad's first novel, which I also co-wrote with him. It was sort of a pile of chapters that I organized and found a way of connecting them into kind of an ongoing story, and sort of did a lot of research to get the tone and style and everything of that particular book right. And then as I was working on it, there was a B, or maybe even we could call it a C level plot that had to do with searching for this treasure down on the coast of Chile. So it showed up there. That was 1937. My dad wrote his original draft in 1960. He was never happy with it. He put it aside. He dug it out in the late 1980s when he was having some other issues. He wanted to substitute it for another book and thought, well, maybe I can just polish this. And he read through it. He didn't think he could. And I was asking questions about it. And he said, well, here, you read it. And then the two of us talked about it quite a bit, came up with some plans for what it could be. But by then he had kind of regained confidence in the thing that he was working on, and he went on to do that. And then he didn't live too much terribly longer after that. So he never got back to it.
Well, all I can say is I am so glad you resurrected it. And I am so glad that it grew from that, as you would say, the fourth act. If I can just start with the characters in this, there are so many layers to them. At a high level, sometimes you look at things and you think, oh, well, it's kind of a spy, espionage, action thriller. How many layers can people have? And I think part of it is this time period that you're trickling after in world history is so very complex and powerful. And you gave us characters that really do seem rooted in that time and have histories that go back into very, very difficult and dark places. How did that come up? Obviously, you're going back and you're giving us a lot of book beyond what your dad had.
Yeah.
Developing that, was that something that just came naturally, or did you have to spend a lot of time going back in history and saying, who were these people?
I spent a lot of time going back into history and looking into things like that. Some of it is, I think we're all kind of fascinated by the time in history that's maybe just before we were born. One of the reasons my dad probably didn't revise this story and went back to writing Westerns is because my mother was pregnant with me. But I also grew up knowing a lot of guys from that time period, and knowing that although they were very regular people, people who were incredibly loving parents and all kinds of things, they were all my parents' contemporaries. A lot of them had been through a lot of stuff, and they had kind of come out the other side just fine, but it hadn't been cost-free. And I read a lot of memoirs of people from that time period. Okay, so here's a wonderful piece of publishing history. When the Bantam Books company acquired Random House, the company is now called Random House, but one of the things that they did for all of their authors is they sent every author a copy of every single book they published. So like 3 or 4 times a year, we would get these giant cartons of books. It was like Christmas, and the whole family would just like dive in, kind of grabbing everything they thought they were interested in. And one of the things that showed up were an awful lot of first-person memoirs written 10, 15 years after World War II about people's World War II experience. And while there were plenty of Brits and Americans, a lot of the senior German officers were extraordinarily well educated. And so they were very good writers. And I had a bunch of those things that I had never dived into. I just grabbed them. When I was a kid, they were just cool covers. They had like tanks and submarines and stuff on the cover. And so I grabbed them thinking I might be interested someday. And 40 years later, 50 years later, I was. And so I read a lot of that stuff. And then I just constantly did a lot of checking into details, into words. It's like, was this word actually used at that time period? Just trying to suss out things like that. And luckily I had people who helped me who were somewhat older than I am that kind of knew what they were talking about.
It felt so authentic. But on top of it, again, those layers, I think, and you kind of alluded to that, knowing folks from that generation. I had the privilege of knowing some of those folks as well. And like you said, you're talking to somebody who's like, maybe I am a procurement manager in a business today. Oh, but do you know what he did in Guadalcanal? Or do you know what he went through here or that? And there were just folks that you never would have guessed. And I remember when I found out that Jimmy Stewart flew in a over Berlin. Wait, what?
Yeah.
The guy who was so, it's a Wonderful Life. It's like,
right.
What? Those are the same two people. And I think that's where this is such good art, because not only is it thrilling and fun, but because of that depth and that humanity, none of us are 100% good and none of us are 100% bad. And so seeing those layers and feeling a little something about that as a reader was so great, because not having the golden child who's so perfect, and not just someone who might struggle with alcohol or something really big. I mean, you give people some really big things on their ledger. If we could talk a little bit about the main character, Mike Fowler. I hope it's not a spoiler, but what he did in the military.
I don't consider this to be a spoiler.
Okay. Good. What he did in the military is so profound. It was one of the most striking things, because I've been to Pearl Harbor, I'd been to the museums there, and I just remember having my stomach in my mouth the whole time.
Yeah, so this is a guy who joined the Navy before World War II. He was a gunner's mate, which means a weapons maintenance expert and weapons expert. But he, perhaps not advisedly, happened to take a class in submarine rescue diving in December of 1941. Pearl Harbor happened, and they immediately grabbed his entire class, flew them out to Pearl Harbor. And this actually comes from a book called Descent into Darkness about a man that this actually happened to, and put them to work first recovering the bodies from the sunken ships in Pearl Harbor, and then salvaging those ships and getting them back into action. And it was probably the largest maritime salvage job that's ever occurred in world history. And they did incredible things. I mean, these guys had no idea to do what they were doing, but the Navy basically said, oh yeah, and we'll get you anything, whatever it takes, however many pumps it takes, however many winches it takes, however, whatever it is, it's yours. Just get these ships sailing again. They did crazy stuff, and it was very, very dangerous work, a lot of times in absolute darkness. If you see photographs of these guys coming up from inside the battleships, they'll be like, wearing their mask, and they're just, everything on their body is just covered with grease and oil. And they'd break into rooms where meat and paper goods and fabric had been rotting, that were full of explosive hydrogen sulfide gas. And hydrogen sulfide in the right concentration, if you take a breath of it, you're out. I don't mean like unconscious, I mean dead. It was incredibly difficult. And then he went on to underwater demolition teams. This is the group that became the SEALs. And their job was to scout landing sites for island invasions and often blow up obstacles that would be in the way of the landing craft. And so they would be in there at night in a bathing suit with a knife and a grease pencil and plexiglass to take notes on. And a lot of these guys, when they were actually doing their measurements, when they were going in ahead of time, they would ink marks on their body for how deep the water was, so they could like stand in the water and like note what mark it came at. And then they would write down like how deep the water was at different times and how the tide was changing. And then a lot of times they would come back under fire and detonate things that they had to get out of the way of the invading soldiers. Then at the end of the war, he's volunteered for a mission where he mysteriously needs to assassinate some Japanese businessman.
It was such an amazing superpower, really, for you to give him that type of knowledge, because how many people in the world at that time, especially because this was emerging technology, would have had that skill set. So it fits so well in the story and just was an amazing linchpin to the whole thing. We talk about emerging technologies and what came out of World War II. And Voss speaks to an issue repeatedly throughout the book. And it's almost like he's almost the voice of combined humanity to some degree. Over and over again, whether it's he's reading something in the newspaper that is happening in 1961, or whether he's reflecting back on what had happened during the war. And many times he's complaining about what the Germans did, and he was part of that. But he also talks about how lots of times people do things because they can without asking whether they should. And I thought that was so profound because you look at what's going on with AI robotics and a lot of things that we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
I had Douglas Preston on the show.
Doug is a friend of mine. He's a great guy.
He is absolutely awesome. We were talking about his novel Extinction. And at the time that he was coming onto the show, they had just announced that they had brought direwolves back. And Douglas and I were like, well, do we need direwolves? I mean, we probably don't want direwolves. So I loved that you explored that. And Voss was exactly the right person to do it, because he had that view, he had that experience of it. And I was wondering, what do you think we'll ever learn that lesson as human beings?
No. Voss is the German partner in this pair of arms dealers. Mike Fowler's the American partner. And these guys are the protagonists of the story. But I always wanted Anton Voss to make you a little uncomfortable. I wanted him to make you comfortable. You see him sometimes as kind of an avuncular character, almost a father figure to Mike Fowler. I certainly never had an experience with kind of a Jungian dark father. My dad was a pretty great guy. I'm always kind of fascinated by that. He does have that quality. He also has this kind of Jungian sort of trickster quality to him, where he's never exactly what you think he is. All the way up to the final pages of the story, he's still surprising you and doing things you don't expect.
And that was part of the fun. Again, that complexity of who are these people? You're as much reading for the plot as you are for the characters, and see, okay, well, what side is everybody going to be on in the end? Because again, you have a wonderful cast of characters. I can't still say enough about the plot and how many twists and turns you had in all the right places, and the settings we got to visit. Oh my goodness.
We had a family friend. He died in the early 2000s, Angelo DiSapio. He was an architect, one of the maybe 3 or 4 major architects who built the modern version of Caracas from the 40s to the early 60s. And so that was chosen for that reason. And San Carlos de Bariloche in Argentina was chosen because this place actually had a Nazi scientist with a secret island laboratory. I mean, all that's true.
That was real? Okay.
That's real.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Beau, you're killing me now, because even when you talked about the Type 21 sub, I actually went down the rabbit hole and started looking that up. I had to go on a research because I was like, okay, I'm assuming that this is all based in history, but it was so cool. Yeah, I won't even get deeper, but yeah. Now you're sending me down another rabbit hole, Beau. I'm going to have to go look this up because that was Now, I do want to kind of get back to how we did the intro today. We talked about the guy who knows how to get things done and who will get things done. Can you give the audience a little background? You have lived an amazing life. Can you just give folks a little window into the types of things you've done?
Okay, I've lived a very quiet, amazing life, but maybe so. So I went to public schools in Los Angeles, and I went to junior college for a year, and then went to California Institute of the Arts. I got a Master's of Fine Art from CalArts. Focused on filmmaking. I worked in the film business for a while. Maybe it was some of the things in my education at CalArts that kind of got me going, but I started noticing that I didn't like certain things about the way that the publisher was handling the covers of my dad's books. So I started interacting with the art department at Bantam, and eventually they're sort of like, well, you just talk to the artist. And so I went on to kind of do this sort of art director thing. My dad was still alive. And I also got into the commercial version, not the books for the blind version, but the commercial version of audio publishing was just starting up. And I had, again, because of my filmmaking background, I had a background in doing audio post-production. And so I got into working with the people doing the audiobooks. And in those days, a lot of our audiobooks were done as dramas. They had a script, they had a full cast, they had sound effects, they had all this stuff. It was like a movie with the movies turned off. I did that stuff. So I was pretty entwined in my dad's business by the time he passed away. I was occasionally doing research for him. Towards the end of his life, he wasn't quite as physically capable. I mean, like the last 2 years. I mean, he was very capable up until his mid 70s. So I would go out into the field and do a certain amount of research for him. When he passed away, I recognized, very much along with my mother, that we had to reorganize what we did business-wise, that our business had always been a proud of this particular ship, and it was the new book my dad was producing several times a year. And we really had to figure out how to go into the backlist business, how to work the entire backlist all the time. So I started working on that. Along the way, I did a great big marketing campaign. We gave away, there was a moment where they uppriced the books and there were a ton of books in inventory. And we were all kind of wondering what to do with them. And I decided that we were going to give them to the armed forces. And so we gave like 1 million books to U.S. Armed Forces. And we started in mid 2000. By the time it was really going, we hit the whole early War on Terror deployment. That was fairly effective. I've gone back and forth and worked in the film business a couple more times. I was able to do a Louis L'Amour graphic novel. I was able to do some other very exciting things. One of the things that happened a few years ago is Walmart is a very big part of our world. It's where a lot of our sales go on. And they were sort of like, you guys haven't had a new book in too long, and we're going to start pulling down the number of books we'll put in our book department because that's getting smaller. And the publisher was like going, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? This is pretty bad. And I was sort of like, no, I've got this project, Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, which is like the story behind the story of all the books. It's almost like the bonus features in a DVD. And so I started sticking those. I got those in maybe 30 plus of the old novels. And then there's 2 new volumes of Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures that are unfinished works or unpublished works, where I dig into his background, dad's correspondence and journals and things like that, and find out what was going on, why he was doing what he was doing, why he was making certain decisions, and put those into kind of an article that's packaged with whatever it is and how he was writing it, what the market was. So I've just been able to take perpetuating my dad's career and turn it into the opportunity to do all kinds of fun stuff. Really, you want to put it, I've been able to take my dad's career and turn it into doing a whole bunch of fun stuff. That's basically what I do for a living.
Well, it sounds like a dream living to me. That's all I can say. And I again, absolutely adored this book. And obviously your dad had so many fans, and now you're getting more and more fans, Beau.
I hope so.
In partnership with your dad. And I'm wondering, for everyone out there who will be dying to read this book, where is the best place for folks to find out about you and what's coming next?
Okay, well, skyringwater.com is a great place to learn. It's almost like the owner's manual for this book, but it has like a little base on every location and every car and every ship and everything else. So hopefully it'll be kind of fun. LouisL'Amour.com is really the place to find all the books and stuff like that. And we're on Facebook and Instagram and all those things. Follow the Louis L'Amour identity and you'll kind of know what's up.
Perfect. Well, I will be all over that Skyring Water website, especially now that you told me that little compound is actually a thing. And I was looking for that. I was loving the cars. You've even got us down in South America, and you're bringing out Impalas and Chevys. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Absolutely a blast. Thank you so much, Beau, for coming today. And thank you for a wonderful read.
You're so welcome, and thank you for being an early reader and giving me this opportunity.
And another thank you. Thank you for keeping your dad's legacy alive and for doing all the good work to take something that was the 4th act and give us 5 out of it. It's just absolutely amazing. The book is Skyring Water, and oh my goodness, if you are looking for a summer thriller, look no further. Thank you again, Beau.
Take care.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.